and God uses those bad things for good. And so that's what we see there. Okay, so next one. This is a long one. The Lord said, this is in Exodus 3, 7, 8. Then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people in Egypt and have heard them crying out because of their oppressors, and I know about their sufferings. I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and to bring them from that land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And so this is God talking to Moses, right? And so at this point in time, we go from Genesis to Exodus. Joseph and his family, they live in Egypt. And what happens to his descendants? They end up in slavery, right? And so back to slavery, back to this evil thing that's happening. And as they're there, they're crying out to God, asking God to save them, asking God to deliver them from the hands of the Egyptians and to free them from slavery. And God basically says, I have observed the misery, I've heard the people, and I'm going to do something about it. And it says in verse 8, I have come down to rescue them. And so, this, once again, is teaching us something about God, that God doesn't just sit back on his throne in heaven and just twiddle his thumbs and enjoy these different things. No, he's a very active God in the world. He does something about the hurts and pains that people go through. And so when I grew up, when I was most of your age, especially middle school and early high school, I knew a lot about God, but I didn't really know God very well. And there's this word deism. It's where people believe in God, but they think God's very distant. Basically, they think God created the world, and then he lets the world just sit there. He doesn't ever get involved in what's going on in the world. And I didn't necessarily know that term, but that's how I would describe myself. It's like I certainly believed in God, but I didn't think God really cared about the day-to-day actions of the world. But the more you look at the Bible and the more you really pay attention to what God's doing in our world, he is a very active God. He's not just sitting back. He's not just doing nothing. He's very involved in the going-ons of the world. And so it says, I have come down to rescue them. And then he ultimately does rescue all of the Israelites from slavery. He delivers them through the plagues on Egypt, and they are able to enter into this promised land that he promised through Abraham's family. And so God keeps his promises, and God rescues us from all this hurt and pain. And so that's what we're seeing. And it's talking about, I have come down. What's another instance? This is specifically God saying he's coming down, doing all these plagues in Egypt. But what's another instance that we think of when God came down to earth? Maybe we celebrate something in December.
Jesus.
Right? Yeah, Christmas. That's God coming down. When Jesus stepped into our world, when God himself became man, he got involved in the goings-on of the world. He wasn't content to sit back and look at the suffering and look at the sin and all of that. And he decided to get involved in the world then through Jesus. And he does the same thing today. We get the Holy Spirit. When things happen in our lives as Christians, we have God inside of us. He has come down to live and dwell in us so that he can transform and change the world. So that the misery going on, we're supposed to play an active role in making things better, because God, as Christians, if we believe what we believe, as Christians, God lives inside of us and wants to use us to make a difference in the world. And so that's what we see. Genesis, it's the story following Abraham and his family. And then they enter into slavery, and then God delivers him and his family in Exodus from Egypt. Okay, so then we get, who knows the next book of the Bible? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. We're going to come back to Leviticus in a second. But I'm going to combine basically Leviticus and Deuteronomy, because if I'm going to summarize those books of the Bible, there's one verse that comes to mind from each of them, and Jesus quotes them. And so if you read Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, they have a lot of laws, right? These are some of the weird ones are like, don't eat bats, which apparently the reason we don't eat bats is because we don't want coronavirus. But there's some of these weird things in the Levitical code, like if a house gets mold and you clean it and it comes back, you're supposed to burn down the house. There's all these interesting things in Leviticus. You're like, why did God say that? I don't really understand why he said that or why he did that. And so...
You know a witch you're supposed to stone to death?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of things like don't wear clothing made from 2 different types of cloths, and it's like, what? I don't understand. And so about Leviticus and Deuteronomy, as God's giving these laws, as God's giving these rules, we have to keep something in mind, that God gave those rules and laws to certain people at a certain time, right? In America, we have certain laws and certain rules, right? If you go to Japan, do the laws of America still apply? No, not necessarily. They probably have some similar laws as to what we have, but it's a different set of rules. And so God gave a lot of those laws specifically to Israel at that point in time for their country. Now, all of those laws, regardless of if they do apply or don't apply to us now as Christians, reveal something about who God is and what his character is and how he wants us to live. And so, yes, we can eat a lot, like we can eat pig, like we can have bacon, we can put bacon bits on our food like we did earlier. We're allowed to do that now, which I'm super grateful for, but there are reasons God gave that at that time. So Jesus, when asked about all these rules, about all these laws, he's asked about all of it, and he says, which one's the greatest? He quotes Deuteronomy 6, 4 and 5. Listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your soul and with all of your strength. And so God is saying of all of the commandments, by far the most important one is to what? Love. Love specifically God. Everything else about those commandments, everything else about those laws can be summed up by loving God. And those laws, what they are examples of how we love God, right? If, Christine and I are married, if she has, I love buffalo wings, huge buffalo wing fan, I would be happy if we had buffalo wings for dinner every single day. Like, that would be awesome, that would be great, it'd be terrible for me, but I would be super happy and enjoy that, because I love buffalo wings. Now, if I brought buffalo wings home for Christine every night, would she love that? No. She wouldn't at all. Like, she might enjoy it from time to time, but she would not love eating buffalo wings every single day. And so when we think about how to love people, how to love God, it's not just what we think and it's not just what we want, but we have to love people and we have to love God in ways that they appreciate. And so God has shown us how to love him through those laws in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. But the core of it all is to love God with all of our very being. And so Jesus points it out as the greatest commandment. And then he goes on to quote Leviticus, and he says the second greatest commandment, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. Don't take revenge, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And so when we look at Jesus in the New Testament, we often are like, oh, well, the New Testament is so different from the Old Testament. But Jesus says he came to fulfill the Old Testament. He gave the Old Testament for a reason. And he's quoting the Old Testament as the most important thing is loving God and loving those around us. And so the Old Testament still applies through the lens of Jesus. We read the Old Testament through the lens of who Jesus is, but still really important. And he says clearly the greatest things are to love God and to love one another. And so that's what we really see. If we're summing up all those laws that he gives in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it's all about loving God and loving others. And fun fact, going back to Deuteronomy, the word, and I think it's actually the Greek word for Deuteronomy, means like second law. It's like the law is given a second time. Because as you look at it, when it's first given in Leviticus, God gives these rules and laws to his people in Leviticus. Numbers, which we'll talk about probably next week, Numbers is where they get it all wrong. Like, they're not doing what they're supposed to, they rebel against God, and basically before they actually enter into the Promised Land, all the Israelites die off and a new generation of people come in. And so that's why in Deuteronomy we get a lot of repetition of the law being given again, because it's this new generation hearing from God. Because the first generation heard from God and didn't do what he said, and so they died natural deaths for the most part. And then the new generation came in. But one of the people who was one of the few people who was there initially and then actually got to enter into the Promised Land was Joshua. Which, fun fact, the name Joshua and the name Jesus are the same. It's the same name. Yahweh saves. So God saves is what both of those names mean. And Joshua, if we're to summarize the book of Joshua, at the end of Joshua, so where we're starting in Joshua, is where they're going into the Promised Land. All this time they're getting ready to go into the Promised Land. They're ready to get this great, wonderful land that God has promised to Abraham and to his descendants and to their descendants. They're finally getting it. And they go in to have these battles, and they take over like they're supposed to. They do everything. They go to battles. They win these battles. And at the end, Joshua's about to die. He's about to go on to the next stage of life. And he says, therefore, fear the Lord and worship him in sincerity and truth. Get rid of the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, but worship the Lord. But if it doesn't please you to worship the Lord, choose for yourselves today the one you will worship. The gods of your fathers worship beyond the Euphrates River, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. As for me and my family, we will worship the Lord. And so what Joshua is saying is for all of us, we have the decision. Are we going to follow God, or are we not going to follow God? No one can force you to follow God. Your parents can encourage you to follow God. They can encourage you to come to church and youth group and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it is your choice. Are you going to follow God, or are you going to follow your own desires, your own passions, your own skill set? You're going to pursue education, which is a good thing, sports, which is a good thing, pursue all these other things, or is your primary pursuit going to be to serve and follow God? And so that's the choice that Joshua gave all the Israelites, and that's the choice that we have today. Are we truly going to follow God? And one other story from the book of Joshua that I think really is important. Right as they go into these battles for the first time, they're going to Jericho, right? So at Jericho, they're marching around, right? Everyone remember that story when you were a kid? They're marching around Jericho. You remember that one? And then they yell and they take over the city and stuff like that. Before that battle takes place, which was the first and most important battle they're going through, before that battle takes place, Joshua's going and he encounters this heavenly being. He thinks it's an angel, but most people believe it was actually Jesus before he was born, because Jesus has always existed. He was just born at Christmas as a human. And so he encounters what most people believe to be Jesus, and he asks this heavenly person, are you on their side, or are you on our side? And so essentially he's asking Jesus, are you on Jericho's side, or are you on Israel's side? And this heavenly being responds, neither. I'm not on either side. And I think that's really important for us to remember. So many times in life, we're trying to convince God to get on our side. We're praying and asking God, come have my back, come do this for me. God, this is what I believe, get on my side of this issue, get on my side of this debate, get on my side of this sporting event. We're trying to convince Jesus to be on our side, when the truth of the matter is, Jesus is always on the side of what is right and always on the side of what is good. So instead of trying to convince Jesus to get on our side, okay, you know what? I need to get on his side. Whatever side Jesus is on, that's the side I need to get on. And it's so easy to try to just have our own thoughts and ideas and what we've grown up thinking and stuff like that. But we have to put ourselves and ask ourselves, where is Jesus? Where is God? What does he think? What does he believe? And that's the side that I want to get on. Right? And so that's the summary real quick, just from a couple verses, tracing Genesis through Joshua. It's really the whole Old Testament is the story of Abraham's family. It's tracing all through the Israelites when they're in a foreign land, then they enter into this land and they go into slavery, they get delivered from slavery, they mess things up terribly. If you read the Old Testament, you realize they just messed stuff up a lot. There's a lot of hope for us in today's world because the Israelites got everything wrong pretty much every time. And so this is where we're at in the story of the Bible. They finally do go into Israel and they take it over. They've taken over the land. What are they going to do? Are they going to follow their own desires? Are they going to follow these false gods? Or are they going to follow the one true God? So I'm going to pray real quick, and then I'll have a special time of prayer real quick for Caleb Overcash. But I'm going to pray, we'll wrap up the video, and then I'm going to have some prayer for Caleb. So let's pray real quick. Jesus, thank you for today. Thank you for your goodness and love. God, thank you for the Bible. Thank you for just the wonderful things we read and how you really want to make a difference in our lives through what you've revealed in the Bible. And so, God, may we just cling to these things. May we cling to the fact that you know us, that you love us, that, Lord, when bad things happen in our lives and in the world, you want to get involved, that you want to make a difference, and that you want to use us in that you truly have come down to make a difference in this world, and to make bad things good, and make evil things right again. And so, God, we just thank you for that. In your name, Jesus.